My father watched a man walk through machine gun fire like he was strolling through rain. No helmet, no cover, just walking, bullets everywhere. The man reached their foxhole, sat down, and asked if they had enough ammunition. Dad thought he was insane. He was. His name was George S. Patton. My father told me this story only once, 3 months before he died. He was 87 years old, sitting in his wheelchair by the window, looking at nothing. I had asked him about the war 1,000 times over the years. He always changed the subject. But that afternoon, something broke loose inside him. Maybe he knew he was running out of time. Maybe he just needed to finally say it out loud. He turned to me with those faded blue eyes and said, "I met the craziest man who ever lived, and he saved every single one of us." I poured him a whiskey. He took a long sip, and then my father, who had never spoken about the war, talked for 3 straight hours. What he told me changed everything. Thought I knew about courage, about leadership, about what it means to be a soldier. This is his story. The story of the man who walked through bullets. December 1944, the Ardennes forest. My father was 22 years old, a private first class in the Third Army. He had been in Europe for 5 months. 5 months of mud, cold, and death. The Germans had just launched their massive counteroffensive, what history would call the Battle of the Bulge. My father's unit was dug in near a small Belgian village. The name didn't matter anymore. Every village looked the same. Destroyed buildings, frozen corpses, shell craters filled with black water. They had been under constant artillery bombardment for 3 days, no sleep, almost no food, ammunition running low. The temperature had dropped to 15 below zero. Men were getting frostbite. Some were getting trench foot so bad their toes turned black and fell off. My father shared a foxhole with 2 other men. One was from Texas, a farm boy named Williams. The other was from Brooklyn, a fast-talking kid everyone called Sal. They huddled together for warmth, their breath forming clouds in the frozen air. They didn't talk much anymore. There was nothing left to say. They just waited, for orders, for supplies, for death, whatever came first. On the 4th morning, German machine guns opened up from the tree line. My father pressed his face into the frozen dirt. Bullets snapped overhead, cutting through branches, thudding into the snow. Williams was hit in the shoulder. He screamed. Sal tried to pull him down deeper into the foxhole. Blood sprayed across the white snow, steaming in the cold air. My father fired back blindly. He couldn't see anything, just muzzle flashes in the gray forest. The noise was overwhelming. Machine guns, mortars, men screaming. The world had become pure chaos. And then my father saw something impossible. A figure emerged from behind their lines, walking, not running, not crawling, walking, upright, straight toward the foxholes, toward the bullets. My father thought it was a soldier who had lost his mind, shell shock. He had seen it before. Men who just stood up and walked into death because their brains couldn't take any more. He yelled at the figure to get down. The man didn't listen. He kept walking. Bullets kicked up snow around his boots. He didn't flinch. He didn't hurry. He walked like he was crossing a parking lot on a Sunday afternoon. The man reached their foxhole and dropped in beside them. My father got his first good look at him. Old, maybe late 50s, face like leather, jaw set hard, eyes that burned with something my father had never seen before. Not fear, not excitement, something else. The man was wearing a standard field jacket, mud everywhere, no visible rank. His helmet was dented and dirty. He looked like any other exhausted soldier who had been in the field too long, except for those eyes. Those eyes were not normal. The man looked at Williams, bleeding and moaning. He pulled out a field dressing and handed it to Sal. "Pack the wound. Pressure. Don't let him go into shock." His voice was calm, commanding, like the bullets still snapping overhead were someone else's problem. Then he turned to my father. "How's your ammunition?" My father was so stunned he could barely speak. "Running low. Maybe 20 rounds each." The man nodded. "Food?" "Nothing for 2 days." "Reinforcements?" "Nobody knows we're here." The man pulled out a small notebook and wrote something down. My father finally found his voice. "Sir, you need to get down. There's a German machine gun nest in those trees. They'll cut you apart." The man looked toward the tree line, studied it for a moment like he was examining a math problem. "2 guns," he said. "Maybe 3. Poorly positioned. They're firing too high." My father stared at him. Who the hell was this guy? The man turned back to my father. "What's your name, soldier?" "Private First Class Harrison, sir. David Harrison." "How long have you been in this position, Harrison?" 4 days, sir." "And nobody's come to check on you? No officers? No sergeants?" My father laughed bitterly. "Our lieutenant got killed on day 1. Sergeant Morrison took shrapnel yesterday. We don't know where anybody is." The man's jaw tightened. Something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "You've been holding this position for 4 days, with no leadership, no supplies, and no communication?" "Yes, sir." The man wrote something else in his notebook. Then he looked at my father with those burning eyes. "You're a damn good soldier, Harrison, all of you. Don't forget that." The machine gun fire intensified. Someone was trying to bracket their position. The man didn't seem to notice. He was looking at the terrain, studying the German positions, muttering to himself. My father grabbed his arm. "Sir, whoever you are, you need to get to cover. This isn't a place for officers." The man smiled. It was a strange smile, almost amused. "Son, I've been getting shot at since before you were born. A few German machine guns aren't going to change my schedule." He stood up, just stood up, in the middle of a firefight. My father tried to pull him down. The man brushed his hand away. "I need to see the other positions. You'll have supplies by tonight. Ammunition, food, medical support." "How?" my father asked. "How are you going to get supplies through this?" The man was already climbing out of the foxhole. He turned back one last time. "I'll figure it out. I always do." And then he walked away, back through the bullets, back through the machine gun fire, walking, not running, just walking. My father watched him disappear into the smoke and chaos. He was certain the man would die, absolutely certain. Sal looked at my father. His face was pale. "Who the hell was that?" "I don't know. Some crazy officer, has to be. Nobody else would be that stupid." Williams groaned. The bleeding had slowed, but he needed real medical attention. Sal pressed the field dressing harder against the wound. "You think he was telling the truth about supplies?" My father shook his head. "I think he was out of his mind. Shell shock. Had to be. Nobody walks through machine gun fire like that. Not unless they've lost it." But something nagged at my father. The man hadn't seemed crazy. His eyes were too sharp, too focused. He had looked at the German positions like a professional. He had asked exactly the right questions. He had taken notes. What kind of shell-shocked soldier takes notes? The firefight continued for another 2 hours. Then, slowly, it died down. The Germans pulled back. Evening came. The temperature dropped even further. My father huddled with Sal and Williams, trying to stay warm, trying to stay alive. He had given up on the crazy man's promise. Supplies weren't coming. Nobody was coming. They were going to freeze to death in this forgotten foxhole. Just after midnight, my father heard engines, trucks, coming from behind their lines. He grabbed his rifle, ready for anything. Out of the darkness came a convoy. 6 trucks, American trucks. They stopped near the tree line, and men started unloading crates, ammunition, rations, medical supplies, blankets. A medic appeared at their foxhole with a stretcher. "We're here for your wounded." My father was speechless. Sal helped load Williams onto the stretcher. The medic was already working on the wound, injecting morphine, applying fresh bandages. "Who sent you?" my father managed to ask. The medic shrugged. "Orders from the top. Some general came through this afternoon, raised holy hell at headquarters, said there were men dying out here with no support. An hour later, we were loading trucks." "What general?" "Don't know. Didn't see him. Just heard he tore the supply officers apart. Literally screamed at them. Said if these men didn't have ammunition by midnight, he was going to personally shoot someone." My father felt something cold run down his spine. That crazy man. He had actually done it. 3 days later, my father's unit was rotated back for rest. They had survived. Williams would lose part of his shoulder mobility but keep his arm. Sal was uninjured. My father had frostbite on 2 toes but would recover. They were trucked to a rear area where hot food and warm tents waited. It felt like heaven. On the second day, a formation was called. My father stood in line with hundreds of other exhausted soldiers. Word spread that some general was coming to inspect the troops. My father didn't care. He just wanted to sleep. He had been sleeping for 16 hours straight and still felt tired down to his bones. The jeeps arrived. Officers jumped out and started organizing things. Then another jeep pulled up. This one had flags, stars. My father watched a man climb out, tall, ramrod straight, immaculate uniform, gleaming helmet with 3 stars, polished boots, pearl-handled revolvers on his hips. Everything about him screamed power, authority, command. My father didn't recognize him at first. How could he? This man looked like a god of war, nothing like the mud-covered figure who had dropped into his foxhole. The general walked down the line of soldiers, inspecting, nodding, occasionally stopping to speak with someone. My father stood at attention, eyes forward, barely breathing. The general was getting closer. 10 men away, 5 men away. Then he was standing directly in front of my father. Those eyes. My father recognized those eyes, the same burning intensity, the same fierce intelligence, the same look of a man who calculated everything, feared nothing, and bent the world to his will. The general stopped, looked at my father. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then the general smiled, that same strange, amused smile. "Private Harrison, how are those ammunition supplies holding up?" My father couldn't speak. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. The general leaned closer. His voice dropped, so only my father could hear. "You held that position for 4 days with nothing. That's the kind of soldier who wins wars. Don't ever forget what you're capable of." Then he moved on, down the line, inspecting other soldiers. My father stood frozen. His hands were shaking. Sal was standing next to him. "What did he say to you? Do you know him?" My father could barely whisper the answer. "That's General Patton." Sal's face went white. "Patton? The Patton? That was Patton in our foxhole?" My father nodded slowly. His mind was still trying to process it. The crazy man, the mud-covered figure who walked through machine gun fire, The officer with no visible rank who sat in their foxhole and asked about ammunition, that was George S. Patton, the commander of the entire Third Army, a 3-star general with over 400,000 men under his command, and he had personally walked through a firefight to check on a forgotten foxhole with 3 privates. My father watched Patton finish the inspection, climb back into his jeep and drive away. He never spoke to him again, but he never forgot. For the rest of the war, my father fought differently, not because he wasn't afraid, he was always afraid, but because he had seen something that changed him. He had seen what leadership actually looked like, not from behind a desk, not from a safe headquarters miles from the front, but from inside a foxhole under fire, with bullets snapping overhead. Patton had been there, where his men were dying. That meant something. Years later, my father read books about Patton. He learned things that explained what he had witnessed. Patton had a policy. He refused to command from the rear. While other generals studied maps in comfortable headquarters, Patton drove to the front lines almost every day. He wanted to see the terrain himself. He wanted to talk to soldiers himself. He wanted to know what his men were experiencing. It was dangerous, insanely dangerous. German snipers, specifically hunted for officers. A 3-star general was the ultimate prize. So Patton developed a disguise. When he went to the front, he stripped off his rank, wore a standard field jacket, covered himself in mud, looked like nobody important. That way, he could move freely without attracting snipers, without soldiers performing for the general, without officers hiding problems. He could see the truth, the real truth of what was happening to his men. My father had witnessed this firsthand without knowing it. The man in the foxhole hadn't looked like a general because he wasn't supposed to look like a general. He was supposed to look like exactly what my father thought he was, a crazy old soldier who didn't know enough to stay down. But there was more to it than just reconnaissance. Patton believed something that most commanders didn't. He believed a general should share the danger of his men, not symbolically. Actually, if he ordered men to die, he should be willing to die alongside them. My father said this was what separated Patton from every other leader he encountered in the war. Other officers gave orders from safety. Patton gave orders from the mud. Other commanders sent men into danger. Patton walked into danger first. It wasn't just strategy. It wasn't just gathering intelligence. It was a statement, a promise. I will not ask you to go anywhere. I won't go myself. My father told me that after the foxhole incident, word spread through the unit. Patton had been there, in the worst fighting, under fire. Other soldiers had similar stories. Patton showing up in unexpected places. Patton walking through artillery barrages. Patton talking to privates like they were the most important men in the army. Because to him, they were. Generals were nothing without the men who actually pulled triggers, and Patton never let himself forget that. My father followed Patton's Third Army across Europe, through Belgium, through Germany, to the end of the war. He never spoke to Patton again, but he saw him several more times, always at the front, always where the fighting was worst. Once, during the Rhine crossing, my father watched Patton standing on a hill overlooking the river. German artillery was falling. Officers were begging him to take cover. Patton just stood there with binoculars, watching his tanks cross. Shells exploded within 50 yards of him. He didn't move, didn't flinch, just watched. My father realized something that day. Patton wasn't brave despite his fear. He had simply decided that fear was irrelevant. The mission mattered. The men mattered. His own survival was secondary. It was a kind of madness, but it was also a kind of purity that my father had never seen in another human being. Complete dedication, total commitment, no compromise, no hesitation, no excuses. Patton was willing to die for his mission every single day. And because he was willing to die, his men were willing to follow him anywhere. The war ended in May 1945. My father came home, married my mother, raised 3 children, worked as an electrician for 40 years, never talked about the war, not to my mother, not to us kids, not to anyone. He kept it all locked inside, the nightmares, the memories, the faces of friends who didn't come home. He carried it silently, the way his generation did, but Patton stayed with him. My father kept a small photograph in his wallet. Not a family photo, a newspaper clipping from 1945. Patton standing next to a tank. My mother found it when she was doing laundry once. She asked him about it. He just said, "That's the man who saved my life," and wouldn't explain further. When Patton died in December 1945 from injuries in a car accident, my father cried. My mother said it was the only time she ever saw him cry during their 62 years of marriage. He didn't explain why. She didn't ask. Some things didn't need explaining. Some bonds went deeper than words. Now I understood. Sitting in that room with my dying father, listening to him finally tell the story, I understood why he had kept Patton's photo for 50 years, why he had cried when the general died. It wasn't hero worship. It was something more personal. In the worst moment of my father's life, when he was freezing and starving and waiting to die in a forgotten foxhole, a man had walked through bullets to reach him, not because he had to. No one would have known if Patton stayed safe at headquarters, not because it was smart. It was incredibly, stupidly dangerous, but because he believed that's what a leader does. He goes where his men are. He shares their danger. He looks them in the eye and tells them they matter. My father had been a 22-year-old kid who thought he was going to die alone in the snow, and George Patton had walked through machine gun fire to tell him he was a good soldier. That moment kept my father alive, not physically, but inside, in the place where hope lives. Patton had given him something to believe in. My father finished his story. The whiskey was gone. The afternoon light had faded to evening. He was exhausted. Talking for 3 hours had drained whatever strength he had left, but his eyes were clear, peaceful, like he had finally set down a weight he had carried for decades. I asked him one last question. "Dad, why didn't you ever tell me this before?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Because I didn't think anyone would believe me. A 3-star general walking through machine gun fire? Sitting in a foxhole with privates? It sounds like a lie, like something I made up to feel important." He looked at me with those faded blue eyes. But it happened, every word. That crazy, magnificent bastard walked through bullets like they were raindrops. And he saved us. Not just me, all of us. Every soldier who served under him. He saved us by showing us what courage really looks like. I held my father's hand. It was thin and fragile, the hand of an old man. But once, that hand had held a rifle in a frozen foxhole, and a general had shaken it. My father died 11 weeks later. We buried him in the veterans' cemetery, next to other men who had served in the war. At the funeral, I told the story he had told me. Some people cried, some people didn't believe it. That's fine. My father hadn't cared about being believed. He had only cared about finally saying it out loud before he was gone. After the funeral, I went through his things. In his desk drawer I found the photograph, the newspaper clipping of Patton. It was yellow and fragile, worn at the edges from 50 years of being carried in a wallet. I had it framed. It hangs in my office now, next to a photograph of my father in his army uniform, young and strong, before the war broke something inside him. 2 men, one famous, one forgotten, but connected forever by a single moment in a frozen foxhole when bullets flew and courage walked upright through the fire. I've read a lot about Patton since my father told me his story. I've read about his victories and his controversies, his brilliance and his brutality, his triumphs and his tragedies. He was not a simple man. He was not always a good man. He slapped soldiers. He made political mistakes. He said things that shocked and offended people. History has argued about him for 80 years, but I know one thing that the history books don't fully capture. On a frozen December day in 1944, when my father was waiting to die, George S. Patton walked through machine gun fire to reach him. He didn't have to. No one would have known if he stayed safe, but he went anyway. Because that's who he was, a general who believed that leadership meant being where your men were, sharing their danger, looking them in the eye. That's not something you can learn from books. That's not something you can fake. That's character, pure and simple, the kind of character that makes men willing to follow you anywhere, even through hell, even through death. My father's generation is almost gone now. The men who stormed beaches and liberated camps and saved the world. They're leaving us one by one, taking their stories with them. But I wanted to share this one before it disappeared forever. The story of a young private in a foxhole and the crazy general who walked through bullets to reach him. Maybe you had a father or grandfather who served. Maybe they told you stories. Or maybe, like my father, they kept it all locked inside. If they're still alive, ask them, listen to them, their stories matter. And if they're gone, remember them. Remember what they did, what they sacrificed, what they saw. My father watched a man walk through machine gun fire like he was strolling through rain. That man was George S. Patton, and my father never forgot. Neither will I. My father carried this story for 50 years before he finally shared it. It makes me wonder how many other incredible stories are locked inside the hearts of veterans who never found the words. Patton walked through bullets. My father walked through life carrying the weight of that memory. Both required courage. What about your family? Did your father, grandfather, or great-grandfather serve? Did they ever tell you their stories? I'd love to hear them. Share in the comments below. Let's make sure these stories survive. Let's make sure we never forget the men who walked through fire.